Hey everyone, welcome back to Easing the Reader, a Wheel of Time reread. It feels like it's been so long since I did this intro that I almost forgot what I usually say. My name is Pearce Hultman. With me I have David Green, my constant partner in crime in this show, and we have Matt Hatch with us today, our special guest. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you for having me. Can't wait to talk about this trilogy.
Yes. And I think last time you were on, I talked about that I had a specific question, and I hope we can get into that today. Something that I found when I was digging deep in Lovecraftian lore.
Okay.
So I was thinking, because we were kind of talking about whether or not Robert Jordan is part of that circle, being part of Conan. So we'll see. We can get some connection there. Yeah. Finally.
And thanks for coming on again. So obviously we usually get you on for the last few chapters of the last book, but fate conspired against us last time. So what we did was Hultman was so excited. He was like, we can talk about all three of them together as one, as Robert Jordan intended. Back in the early 90s, he was like, one day there's going to be the internet and people are going to come on there and they're going to talk all about these books. They won't ever stop talking. So that is what we're here to do. And obviously, if this is your first time on the channel, please give us a like and subscribe. And Matt's channel, The Dusty Wheel, which I'm sure you've heard of, all that information will be below as well in the show notes.
Absolutely. So actually, the first question when we talk about the books as a if we talk about the three books as a trilogy, were they actually intended to be like a trilogy? I mean, obviously Robert Jordan had a whole series or part of a series planned out, but I mean, was he thinking the first three books should kind of be linked?
That's a good question. This came up recently in a discussion we had. I had thought I had heard something about three books at one point, but the answer that I see in the database from an interview that he did in 1991, someone asked, basically this idea that it never intended to be a series, but this is the quote. It says, but it's hard to find space for an 18-inch thick book on your shelf. I took the outline to the publisher saying what I had here was more like 4 or 5 or 6 books. What can I tell you? I signed a 6-book contract. So, I don't think he only ever planned from that statement at that point. Does that mean earlier there wasn't a plan? Does that mean as he started building it out, he didn't see a trilogy here? It seems clear from a structural standpoint that it makes a nice pause point, for the first 3 books, and things do change from this point on, I think structurally. So yeah, I would say that he did see that he had much more material than 3 books, depending on how big those books were, and that he definitely had plans moving beyond. And as we see, to 10, to well more. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not. I don't think that the end of book 3 is really like. I wouldn't say. Well, and I think even though I know that there are more books, I don't think I would say that there was definitely a definitive end, like how Stephen Donaldson has 3. I mean, basically that's 2 trilogies, the Thomas Covenant Chronicles. I mean, there's a definite end to the last book, and then all of a sudden 3 more books show up.
See, so the thing is with the first 3 books and Wheel of Time as well, there's definitive themes that run through these 3 books that kind of disappear from this point on. And one of those main things is and we've talked about this, especially in The Eye of the World, is the Arthurian callbacks that are quite heavy in these first 3 books. And they're hard to get away from because, characters' names are very, very based on Arthurian legend, like, Egwene Alvear is like Guinevere, Randalphor is like Arthur, and so on. Lancelot. But then even you have the Sword and the Stone. Kind of thing, literally the Sword and the Stone. And then from watching the Dusty Wheel in the show notes, there was the whole Jordan himself was talking about Moraine and Nynaeve in terms of like a Morgana at Le Fay and Nimue kind of parallel there as well. Those those themes kind of melt away from this point onwards, and that's why I always think of it in my head with these three books. There is a very distinct link between them, which isn't quite there with the rest of the books.
Well, there's certainly a journey of sorts that, to me, there is a journey that ends, and then a journey that begins. Right? It's Jordan's whole concept of endings and beginnings, and I feel like that does the end of the third book does bring to an end some of the ideas. Rand's becoming, his journey to kind of understand what this is or who he is, his acceptance there. A lot of the characters are transitioning in this moment between, they're finding their footing, if you will. They're journeying to find purpose. And I think you start to see that form for a lot of characters, but it certainly isn't. That'd be a weird place to end this. It's clear that Jordan was not building it in the sense of like not going to speak about everything else coming. And there's lots of foreshadowing that works well beyond here. And that you could go back to our previous discussion on that, which is he always built in things he could do, so that's, anyways.
But I mean, it's interesting because I felt that the end of, if we talk about like the actual kind of like the end of Eye of the World and the end of the Great Hunt, not the climax ending, but kind of like how the trickle effect after, the kind of like Luke and Leia staring out into empty space, knowing Han is gone and they have to find him, that kind of ending, that is a lot more clear in Eye of the World and the Great Hunt. I found that was missing a bit from the Dragon Reborn. It felt like there was much more of a clean break, and that maybe that to me indicates more clearly that maybe, I mean, the next book, is it going to start exactly where the previous one ended, or is it going to be a little bit of time in between, kind of like how it is in Eye of the World and the Great Hunt? Because I mean, there's been a movement in time.
Well, what do you think? As someone who's not read them, do you?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, it definitely feels the way it's written that it's just going to continue. It's like, we'll be back after these messages from our sponsor. It feels like end of book 1 and book 2 are more of like, you will see Rand and his friends, like in the old James Bond movies used to be. Bond will return in Never Say Never Again. And I got
Did you not feel that as much at the end of this one?
No. It felt like it was more of like a clean cut, and it's just like, we'll be back after these messages, basically.
Gotcha. You felt like it was more severe. Okay.
Yeah. So it feels like the next book will start basically where the other one ended.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting kind of takeaway from that. It's hard for me to remember how I felt. Does that make sense? Like,
oh yeah,
I don't know. I think I always felt this way. Is there another book? It was like, I have to wait for it. What? Write faster, which Robert Jordan wrote so fast for the first many books anyway. So that's it. Why do you think, if that's the case, why do you think that he would have done it that way this time? Like, if that is true, Chris?
I don't know, because I feel like apart from maybe Rand returning and everything like that, it felt that there's not as much resolve or resolution at the end of this book as there is in the other books.
I will agree with that.
Yeah, I kind of think with this one, and it's weird. I never really this is the first time I've read the Dragon Reborn since I started writing myself. And I always enjoyed the Dragon Reborn, but I kind of, in my head, I kind of papered over the bits that I didn't enjoy about it and kind of the weird structural things about the Dragon Reborn. And just kind of focus on Matt's arc and the ending and be like, yeah, it's a fun book. Matt's doing fun things and the ending's great. But then when I was looking at this time and kind of studying it and looking at it, he puts so much more work in this book in terms of setting things up for future books. And it's almost like he, at some point when he was writing this, the next 4, 5, 6, 7 books formalized in his mind a lot more than they did when he was writing the previous 2.
Yeah, there is definitely though the final chapter thing that it does feel maybe the final chapter is kind of very much like, and all the stuff still has to go on. Like there is and we'll be right back. So I mean, I guess I feel it that way. That final chapter, he does almost, if you go back and read it, stuffs in like all these random things, like the letter arriving, and like and we're gonna keep on our search for the Black Aja, and all these other things are coming together, and people are waking up to this new reality of what's happened at the city, and so there is but maybe there's not as much of a. Yeah, and now I'm seeing what you're saying. It is a bit more kind of abrupt, and then you're kind of waiting, almost like assuming that the next book will begin from that chapter forward. Like we're missing a chapter. So yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, because Rand is then like in the final chapter again. Rand isn't present for it again, so it's kind of like where you'd expect to have like after the events of his chapter where you'd have like a chapter with the hero where he's kind of basking or reflecting on what's happened, but he's gone. And it's like people saying, oh, they've seen him walking around and like Aiel are following him and all this kind of stuff. And it's that whole thing again throughout the whole book where Rand is kept at a distance from people, which I think works. I actually do think that works. I can see why some people. I remember, and Chris said this to me one time as well. I remember kind of looking into it, and some people that I know that gave up reading The Wheel of Time gave up on this book because they're like, well, Rand's not in it and he's the main character, so it's like it's a bold choice, and I think it works. I think that the problems with this book coming from other areas, but it's an odd choice as well, and a bold choice that in the final chapter of the book he goes back and pushes Rand away again, and it's like, well, you're not allowed to know his thoughts.
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting take on that I hadn't. You started talking about that, and it was like, wow, even to the very end there, we are disconnected. Like the book is called The Dragon Reborn, and that journey, look at the point of view we have in The Eye of the World is very much from Rand's point of view, and everything that happens to him. And at the end of this journey, if you will, we're still absent from him. And so I don't think I realized how much Jordan baked in that idea of, like you said, that disconnect. That Rand, he's created a distance here in this book that is, that's a really I had never thought about that way. You know what I mean? Like, because it could have. I'm trying to imagine a world in which that wasn't, like the Dragon Reborn was still very Rand focused, and then at the end we were in Rand's thoughts. How much of a different tone that would have.
Yeah. It's a really bold choice, and obviously then it's a trick he repeats again in the future. Not to go into massive spoilers with some other characters that he does it too, but it's for a third book that's in a series, and obviously when you're reading through this book, you definitely know. I mean, maybe in The Great Hunt you could be reading it and thinking, oh, it could be a trilogy. You could wrap this all up. Halfway through The Dragon Reborn, you're very much in the mindset there's much more to come in this. So it is a bold choice to kind of push that main character away and tell the reader, listen, you're not to know what's going on in this character's head. And then,
Chris, how does that work? Does that work for you? This one's called The Dragon Reborn. It is somewhat of an ending.
Think I'm trying to think. Well, the reason I'm so quiet is I'm trying to wrap my head around going back to my years when I studied drama. There's a play that is set up in the same way, which actually I can't remember. Well, I mean, you could harken it back to like Waiting for Godot, where Godot never ever shows up. The people just talk about him. And there's another play that's the same, where the main character actually doesn't show up until like the end of the second act. And it's kind of like that whole, it feels like Jordan maybe tried to use that kind of trick. You want to, I mean, I understood. I do like that aspect of Dragon Reborn, because it's kind of like everybody is, well, let's say one of my favorite books is called like The Final Summer, I think is the name of it. And I'm sure both of you know who the Moomins are, the Finn family Moomins.
Yeah, I know the Moomins.
The Moomins?
They've come across to America. They were
no, they have. They've come to the States. They're kind of like troll-like white things that live in Finland.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to look this up now.
It's Swedish fantasy. It's actually written in Swedish, but it's it's part of like finished lore. But anyway, the final book in the series, there's 7 books. The Moomins leave in the 6th book to go out on a trip because the dad wants to go sailing like he did in his youth. They leave and they never return. And in the final book, in the 7th book, which is like in the series about the Moomins are never there. It's about 3 people that go to their house because they need something from them, or they want to go talk to them or something. They all have their own agendas, why, but they never show up. So these 3 people just sit in their house waiting for this family to return. And at the end of the book, they never do. And it kind of gave me the same idea. It was like the picture and what we find out about the Moomins are all through the thoughts and ideas of the people that know them or try to remember them. And it kind of gave me a similar thing. Everybody's like still kind of talking about Rand and why they want to find Rand and what they're afraid of. So we see Rand from the perspective of the people that know him or think they know him the best.
Does it work for you? I mean,
it does, because I love the Moomins. It reminds me very much of that. So I don't know how much Moomin Robert Jordan has read.
I don't either.
The Moomins come from they're from the 70s. So I mean, he might have come across it.
So it's really fascinating to think of it that way, which is that Jordan is inviting us to define Rand, right? He's inviting us to define what he's become. He's inviting us to kind of lean into someone else's interpretation of it. You know, either how Moraine feels about him, how Land feels about him, doesn't matter. Basically, how everyone else feels about Rand. He's really kind of having us question what is our impression of Rand at this point, which I do think works. If this makes sense, it works in the sense of, now that I'm thinking about it this way, Dragon Reborn was never one of my favorites. And it's, although I have this tendency when I read where it's like, oh man, this is one of my favorite books now. For example, I just did a new reader experience with Fires of Heaven. And obviously I won't talk about the book, but as we're going through with the Wheel Weaves podcast, we were talking about it and I was like, oh yeah, I love this book. Why is it never, you know? And I feel the same way when I recently did a live adaptation of the Dragon Reborn. It's like, this is a great book. So I forget the kind of powerful nature of that invitation from the author to basically come to believe that you know what's happening from the opinions of everyone else around that character. So yeah. I love it.
It's kind of a take on it's kind of a spin on Unreliable narrator, which you know he's not really done so far, because I mean the way I kind of look at Jordan's use of third person POV is that he's basically sat on the shoulder. The narrator sat on the shoulder of the character, so you can really hear, and the narrator itself is quite opinionated sometimes as well. The one that always sticks out is like one time when, I can't remember what book it is, but Matt makes a quip and the narrator goes, "That was pure Matt Coffin." It's just like, you know, so, but in this one, it's the first time where you are kind of getting so many people's, like in the Great Hunt, you see you hear Matt's opinion on Rand, but you know that it's coming from Rand is listening to Matt's opinion, like, right? So you can kind of like just be, well, you know, this is the way Matt is, or however. In this book, that is coming straight from that character. So your kind of bias towards Rand is being challenged in a way, because most people in the first 2 books are so on Rand's side, or have formed an opinion of Rand already. And then because we're getting Perrin's opinion, Perrin's kind of suspicion of him, Moraine's worry, Matt's disdain in a way, but also companionship, as you know, Matt's own conflicted view. Your bias of Rand is being challenged in every single chapter. And then he comes in and kind of saves the day at the end and then disappears again. And then you're kind of left with this, who is this guy?
Yeah. Well, somebody you thought you, right? It's kind of that classic, like, no, I know who this person is. I've been in their head, you know, since the beginning. And so, but what's happened? What's changed now? And it does, it kind of create that effect where I'm trying to think what I was thinking at the time. And I don't know. I can't remember whose opinion that I was leaning into about Rand, but I do remember thinking like, wow, like I can't even explain some of the stuff he's done in the Track and Reborn. I don't even want to explain it, right? It's making me not want to interpret it because I really want to believe in Rand and believe in his sanity and believe that he, you know, is someone that I can still kind of support. And this book does begin to kind of question that. I want to go back to the unreliable narrator concept. That is one of Jordan's themes, but the unreliable nature of just truth. What's a fact? What's truth in this world? And he does that, I think, really well by not putting us in Rand's head, so we don't know, and trying to, you know, what is our bias? You know, do we lean into like the wise counselor? You know, is Moraine correct? You know, or do we lean into his friends who should know him really well? You know, and who do you rely on for truth when you can't just, you know, verify it? You know, you can't get 7, you know, scientific sources to prove something out to you. Who do you trust? And I love that Jordan plays with that here.
Yeah.
Or has for all 3 books. He's kind of really built that into his approach. You know, I don't want to talk about how that approach works after this, but yeah, he really kind of settles into that way of, and he answered questions in interviews about it afterwards, talking about like, you know, so you believed, you know, do you believe these characters, and why do you believe these characters? You know, and it makes you kind of go like, wait, you're the unreliable author, you know, like approach here, which I love how he questions and challenged fans in those interview questions.
Yeah. Well, this is the most, I mean, out of the first 3 books, this is the most challenging read and on purpose, I think. I think it's constructed to be challenging, because I think either world is challenging in parts because it's a fresh take on a new thing, and you can see that he's setting things up, and then the ending is the ending, and the prologue is the prologue, and what have you. The Great Hunt is quite a, you know, wild ride. You know, it's all fun times. It's epic. It's, you know, it's something quite familiar but different as well. Like it does, you know, it doesn't really kind of mess with anything that you've kind of. It's basically a smoother version of The Eye of the World, really. Whereas this book, it challenges the reader from straight away, and the characters are challenging each other. Their perceptions are challenged. The structure is challenging for some people as well. How, you know, he changes things from how he was written previously, where he has handled separate POVs. He would do maybe 1 or 2, 3 chapters at a time, whereas in this one he was doing like big chunks of Perrin's POV, then a big chunk of Egwene's, and then a big chunk back to Perrin again. And it was challenging for it's people that had read the first 2, and they picked this book up, and it's like, well, this is quite, even though there is similar things that happen and plot devices that happen in The Great Hunt, the structure of it is very different, which I think Chris struggled with that.
Well, I mean, I struggle with a lot when it came to the Dragon Reborn. I find it to be the weakest of the 3 books. Although I do find when it has some good points in it, the good parts are really good. Like, I do like the change in POV. I like the evolution of Matt and how he's, and I've mentioned this before, kind of like an anti fantasy character, whereas he seems to be commenting on all the fantasy tropes that he encounters, and he encounters a lot of them in this book.
Yeah.
And I find the repetitiveness of the things that happen in this book to be dull. Like what happens to the girls, being kidnapped again and again, and taken again and again, and I don't find that it didn't hold my interest. The Matt parts held my interest, but the story overall just didn't. And I mean, and that, I think, and that speaks to why people dropped the series at this book, and especially I think if you were reading them when they came out. If you weren't sure that there was going to be another book, then you probably, and another book kind of came, and you're just like, yeah, well, I didn't really care for the last book, so I won't buy it. I can go read something else, because I mean, obviously there is a litany of fantasy novels coming out during this time, so you're not spoiled for choice.
Yeah, I haven't heard a ton of readers, but again, there's millions of them, and I haven't met that many of them in person in comparison. So I remember reading the books and thinking probably the same thing, which The Dragon Reborn wasn't as strong for me probably as The Great Hunt, but the totality of the three books together made me definitely curious what was going to happen next. I more so hear, again, not to ruin anything here, but I more so hear people at book 7 were kind of like, I'm out. That's when I've heard people kind of like,
I think
yeah,
our publishing partner Derek Power, I think, bowed out at 7.
Yeah, 7, 8. I definitely
we should really have him on.
Yeah.
And I think that's in part because of what I think that you'll believe the strength of book 4 is. In other words, there may have been kind of a little. It feels a bit more of an experimentation that Jordan is still doing here in book 3. I think it works from this perspective now, going back and reading it and focusing on it as you go back and read it. You're excited to kind of get in the mind of other characters, and it's less like, finish off the story. And clearly Jordan wasn't intending to finish it off here, and so he's building a much greater foundation for where things are going. Yeah. But it is, I think, between the first 3 books, it is the one that I think does take a step back now. But I'm kind of curious, Chris, the trilogy, if you think of it as a trilogy, these 3 books together, how does this sit for you when it comes to epic fantasy, around books being trilogies, if you will, that are being written around the same time?
Yeah.
Or even today, now that you've read things that have happened since,
yeah,
where does it settle for you?
Unfortunately, it doesn't. Yeah. Compare. It doesn't compare, especially when you look at what's been produced since these 3 books came. And I think it's unfair to call it a trilogy, really, because it's very obvious that it's not.
People be angry in comments. This isn't a trilogy.
No, it's very obvious that it's not. But I never got to this point because obviously I ended at The Great Hunt. And The Great Hunt is, it's a very good example of epic fantasy from the time.
Yeah.
But and it's, definitely the series of books, these 3 series of books is definitely better than the Dragonlance series of books, which they at times can seem very, very childish and very, very simple. But I love
Raistlin.
Yeah, of course, we all do. And especially when he's voiced by Kiefer Sutherland. It is so
Wait, the audio of Raistlin is by Kiefer Sutherland?
Well, in the
audiobook?
In the movie.
What movie have I not seen that has Raistlin in it? Is there a Dragonlance movie that has Raistlin?
Yes, there's a Dragonlance movie.
I'm going to have to go watch that today. I don't know. I'm not remembering that there's a Dragonlance movie with Raistlin, but now am I misremembering? No, but there should be. No, I wouldn't be. Don't. Yeah, I got really into the Wheel of Time, and other things stopped existing for me. So
the worrying thing is that maybe you've seen it and you just blanked it from your memory altogether. You're like, no.
Probably best things that have happened.
That's likely what happened.
But anyway, no, and I find that obviously it lacks some of the. And I'm trying to think if it's really contemporary, if it's not. With the Thomas Covenant Chronicles, which I remember really, really liking when I read them when they came, and I think they're about the same time, or maybe a little bit before.
Yeah,
you have like Eddings. You have Eddings and Feist around this time.
Yeah, no, and we've talked about Eddings before, and that's not my cup of tea. But I do like Feist, and Robin Hobb must have been around the same time as well.
Robin Hobb was a little bit after.
A little later. Yeah, I think a little later. But maybe I'm
like Magician would have been. The thing is as well, like Jordan started writing this early 80s, especially Eye of the World. So it's like Magician would have been kind of comparable, and by Feist. And Magician's was one of my favorite fantasy books growing up.
Pug.
Pug and Thomas. But I was on a panel recently at FantasyCon, and it was one of the. It's also an example that I always use quite a lot for bad world building. I'll say bad world building, but power creep in stories, and what I feel, what sets even in, and maybe this is the thing with after reading Wheel of Time so many times, is that a lot of the aspects that I love of Wheel of Time, I always realize when I start rereading it again, don't come in until after book 4. Right? So you kind of like bring this in, but Robert Jordan does a great job of escalating the power for everyone. So not when Rand and everyone else is getting more powerful, other people are left behind, but then other things come into the world and other characters appear and other things come in. Like Feist trilogy, the original Rift Wars trilogy, is a poor example of that, because, and I think a lot of trilogy fantasy around that time doesn't compare to Wheel of Time in my case because of this, is because Thomas and Pug by the end of the first book are just ultra powerful, to the point where, and Macross the Black is as well, to the point where the next book and then the book afterwards and subsequent books in the series are like, we need to take these characters and we need to hide them somewhere for most of this book, because they could just appear and just click the fingers and the problem would be solved. And that is a problem. Like you look at Shannara and you look at even some aspects of the Farseer trilogy as well, where there is this, and it's a problem that comes across quite a lot. I mean, there's a problem. I was talking about the Matrix recently. The Matrix trilogy suffers from the same problem because Neo is all powerful by the end of the first film, and then to the extent where in the third film they just lock him away in a subway for about half the film. Like, you just can't have him here, right? And I think that's something that Robert Jordan does a really good job of avoiding, which other fantasy of around that time didn't do.
Yeah, I want to add on to that, which is there is a certain tendency, like I said, I love Raistlin. There's a certain kind of cult of personality tendency in a lot of fantasy where it's very focused on that singular person, and you're just basically waiting until you can get back to reading about that one person. It's like, just give us Jon Snow already. I know I just offend a lot of people. Tyrion's awesome too in the book. So I mean, awesome anyway.
No, but I agree. But I mean, and when you have that, like you have Raistlin, and I mean, and even in to some extent Elric. By Moorcock, you have this, but I mean, Raistlin, if I don't remember incorrectly, and the same with Elric, they're sickly. I mean, they're all powerful, but they're kind of like dying, which gives them an interesting dichotomy, which I really, and I think that's why Raistlin is a good character. Other trilogies at the same time is like the Coldfire trilogy by C.S. Friedman. I think is a great trilogy, which came out in 91.
I gotta try that one
last time about what book series they should produce.
Yeah, the sickly nature thing. What Jordan's done, I think, really well is he's stretched out a lot of these things that, like David was mentioned, just other authors just kind of give you. It's like, he's sick and powerful. Let's move on. Let's get some cool stuff. Let's see what the sick and powerful person's going to do. Isn't it crazy? And there's a certain nature of how Jordan stretches that out into a much larger world that's much more complex. That's one thing I think I loved when it happened. And Chris, I'm kind of curious, do you think that others created as complex, as nuanced, and as large of a world and a metaphysics concept within a first 3 books of however many books they wrote than Jordan had at the time of kind of just, of the fantasy that was going on? And maybe I missed others that were doing just as, what I think is as good a job as he was doing this way.
Maybe not at the same time. I would still argue that Friedman does it in her Coldfire trilogy, and she only did the 3 books, and I think she does. And I mean, there are similarities there. It's kind of like you don't really know what age we're talking about. If it's a fantasy middle-aged fantasy world, or if it's like 1700s, or if it's in the future, or if it's in our world and stuff like that. So I mean, there's a lot of similarities between Friedman and Jordan, I think. Le Guin's Earthsea trilogy does, but I mean that's obviously, I mean, long before
Yeah.
Jordan. Maybe if she had written thicker books, I think it would be more evident. I mean, they're obviously quite short, but I mean, I think that would be about it. I don't know if you can argue that Donaldson does that in Thomas Covenant.
Yeah, I don't think he does. I think the thing that Jordan, I always saw this quote when I first picked up Wheel of Time. It was when, funny enough, it was when Crossroads of Twilight had come out. So it was 2000, 2001. There was posters everywhere for it in the underground that I used to go to get to work. And so obviously it's the least popular book and probably in the whole series, right? And it was everywhere. And I was like, what is this? And the quote underneath it was, Jordan reveals the world that Tolkien began to uncover. And obviously I was a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I'd read the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales and all this kind of stuff. So I was kind of always looking at this quote and I was like, I'll be the judge of that. I'll be the judge. But I think it's a really good quote because a lot of the fantasy that was coming around the time of Eye of the World and subsequently, Great Hunt came out the same year. Dragon Reborn was 91. Shadow Rising 92. Somehow in a year's time he comes out with the Shadow Rising, which is quite incredible. You had a lot of the popular fantasy. So if you talk about Eddins, you talk about Ursula Le Guin, Thomas Covenant, it was all very soft magic systems, and it was all very, worlds that were familiar to everyone. Like you look at Shannara with Terry Brooks, and it was very, he admitted himself the first one is basically a Lord of the Rings ripoff because that's what he was comfortable with. He wrote it as a kid in his late teens, early 20s. Jordan obviously took that idea, and when you again, this is knowledge from my own research and watching the Dusty Wheelers, when you hear about his first outlines and first ideas for the Wheel of Time for Eye of the World, it was a lot more removed from Lord of the Rings, and it seemed like he consciously brought that back to bring it as an introduction point because that was what was happening in fantasy. But then he creates this hard magic system. He creates this really defined culturally diverse world, which wasn't really, I mean, you think of like Eddins, and it was like, these people are from this country and they like stealing. These people are from this country and they like drinking. And that was basically it. And that was the kind of standard. And so, yeah, I can get that where how this quote, which I always will think of with Jordan, and it's what got me to read Wheel of Time, was that he did take what Tolkien had started and twisted it further than other contemporary fantasy writers to him were not doing, in my opinion. That's
yeah. No, I agree. I don't know if I agree that Le Guin's magic is soft per se.
It's not hard like Jordan's is hard.
It's not Jordan hard, but it's not Eddings soft either.
No, it's not soft, no.
But it's not Jordan's hard, but it's not Eddings soft. It's
a quote for that.
That's exactly. Hashtag not like Jordan hard. Yeah,
that's the next one. Yeah, that'll be
But another book that I would argue probably is similar, but I think it has to do with their limitations as writers is the Dark Sword trilogy by Weiss and Hickman. I think that has a lot of depth in it compared to like the Dragonlance stuff. Of course, in Dragonlance, you're tied to the Dungeons and Dragons universe, so you have to kind of follow that outline. But whereas the Dark Sword trilogy wasn't like that at all, and I think that one is somewhat comparable.
Yeah, I would actually throw a different one from them in there. I would say Deathgate Cycle from a world building, complex magic perspective. And I think they did what Jordan did was, right, they really mixed in some fun sci-fi kind of elements into their worlds, right? And I think they found, I mean, it's in my definitely my top 10 series, like those 7 books. I love those characters. The one thing I would say that they did not do that Jordan does is, right, they didn't give us the pantheon of all the Sartans, and like in other words, we didn't get like point of views of everything going on. Like you could, if you took those 7 books, they're probably like the size of the first 3 books of the Wheel of Time, you know? So if you imagine for a moment, like a Deathgate cycle that was 14 books long, or each of those books was twice as long, I would have read the hell out of that. I mean, I did, but I mean, I would have loved, that was a series where I would have loved more detail, more point of views, more interesting takes on how the cultures, because like you're saying, David, there was that whole like, well, there's this group of people and they're engineers, and then there's this group of people and they're, you know, whatever. And so they did that same thing, but it is from a magic system perspective and from a world building perspective, and just the complexity of the politics and everyone kind of the shading of what's good and what's evil, and, you know, the philosophies of how you try to determine that, like, who are you for, who are you supporting in this, and, you know, Hugh the Hand, like who do you get behind, because they're all kind of a little bit, you know, they're after their survival of their people, and they're, you know, fighting for their causes that they believe in. And so, yeah, I think Deathgate cycle to me is a good example of, you know, fantasy done really, really well, you know, back then, if you will, at the same time.
So before Chris starts talking about Lovecraft, because I know he's dying to talk about Lovecraft.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask something to you, because I remember watching the Dusty Wheel one time, and you were talking about how in the notes, how the Great Hunt was going to start with Rand washing up on a shore with these strange people. And obviously that then didn't happen, but he announced Infinity of Heaven in the mid 2000s, and that was the idea, wasn't it? That it was going to be someone washing up on a strange shore. When did Jordan get the idea for Infinity of Heaven? Do you know? And how did that affect what was going on in Wheel of Time? Because obviously one of the things that a lot of readers say is like, oh, he's had another idea for another series, so he's just stuck it into the Wheel of Time. But he did have this other series that he was planning.
I don't remember when he started talking about it first. I thought we briefly discussed it with Therese and Linda, but maybe we didn't during that episode that we did. I'd have to go back and do just, it's one of those things that didn't stick with me of like when that concept came up. It certainly sounds, because he doesn't, I thought he even ties it to like, it's kind of, I thought it was like, it's kind of like the Sean Chan, but not the Sean Chan. It's something else. But all of us are like, okay, but this concept sounds like the Sean Chan, you know, like, but cool. You want to tell a story in that world. And that was something he never gave us, right? He didn't give us much of that. So, yeah.
I was wondering because I obviously knew the premise for Infinity of Heaven from when it was kind of started being talked about properly. But when you were doing that show about the notes about the Great Hunt, I think actually it was about just the notes in general, and you were talking about changes to Neve's character, because she was a part of that. It was going to be Rand and Neve washing up on this shore at first, wasn't it? And then it was just Rand, and then it just was something completely different.
Yeah, I can't remember. Now I'm like, oh shoot. He said, let's see, I'm trying to find this quote. Yeah, I mean, the earliest that I'm seeing it like actually be called Infinity of Heaven is in like 2005.
Right.
But you're right. I can't remember what in the notes. Now I have to go back and watch that same episode again. No, I can't remember.
It was just fascinating to me that the Neve seemed to be the character that changed. Neve and Galad, which is a story for another time, I suppose. But Neve was just someone that he just couldn't quite pin. Like her characteristics were there fully formed. It's like when you watch Dr. No, the first Bond film, and it's a 60-year-old film, but so much of Bond was there fully formed straight away. The character, even the trappings of the franchise, the music and everything. Nynaeve's the same. She was, from the very first time we meet her, her character is almost fully formed in a way that a lot of the other characters aren't. But then behind the scenes, he seemed to have such a not sure what he was going to do with her.
Yeah, that's how a lot of the characters are. Like, you just don't see the forming necessarily from the notes into the books. And that's what I find the most fascinating about it is, like, here's these stories and you see him working it. And then you get something in the books and you're like, that wasn't in the notes anywhere. You know what I mean? You didn't get like the final version of that. Now that's to say the actual initial story, you saw a lot of that of Emmons Field and, you know, what that was going to be you can see a lot of the details kind of building up. But a lot of the people in the books, even in like The Great Hunt, you meet Varen, and you meet Varen, you meet so many new characters, but those aren't necessarily like laid out. Like you don't see the forming of that in notes. So a lot of the stuff was either in other notes that we don't have. Again, remember, we don't have we don't have all access to all the notes, and there's other things to be looked into, and I think there's notes that just aren't available there yet. So in that the College of Charleston, but special collections edition, I never say it right, but yeah, we don't have all of those, so it's hard to know. Maybe he did have those kind of forming notes, but yeah, Nynaeve is one of those where you're like, he had some interesting plans for Nynaeve.
And she's going back, read as the older I get, the more I read the Wheel of Time, and the older I get, the more I appreciate Nynaeve and agree with her. And I always remember first reading through it, and I was like, oh my god, I just cannot stand this character. And now I think she's my favorite character, even above Matt, who was always my favorite. But I think it's this is the first time I've read them since becoming a parent as well, and I can be like, yeah, Nynaeve, I am definitely on the same page as you in all of these things.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, so we get to my question about the Lovecraft. Well, the thing was, it was interesting. I came across this as I was doing Lovecraftian things that I tend to do every once in a while, and I came across in part of the Lovecraft circle was a man named Clark Ashton Smith that you guys probably both have heard of. And he created a world called Zothique. And Zothique is a fantasy world set in the future where people have been displaced after a great cataclysm. So you have like Asians in a part of the world where they're not supposed to be, and kind of like how it is with the Wheel of Time. And I was just wondering if there's anything in his notes about Clark Ashton Smith, and if there's actually like a correlation there because of his link to Lovecraft through Howard.
That's a great question.
Because I mean, it is an interesting concept that it's so similar. I mean, because I can understand like how it is in the Shannara series, and partially how it can be in Dark Sword, where we're in our world, but it's been forgotten, and there's remnants of it by like automobiles or whatever, or technology, for instance, that they've forgotten in the Dark Sword trilogy. But this is such a unique concept where exactly the same thing has happened in both these worlds.
Well, first of all, what's the name of the series again? Zothique. How do you spell that?
I have to look it up. I had it written Zothique.
Oh, look at that! I just spelled it into a doc, and I was like, oh wow, I was actually right. That was lucky guess on my part. Yeah, so I mean, that's something I definitely want to go and check out. As far as influences, I don't recall him ever speaking of this, like writing something down in his notes. A lot of the stuff you see in his notes has less to do with authors and other series, and more to do with mythologies that he wanted to include. So a lot of it, was like David mentioned, the Arthurian side. You see that a lot in the notes, but I don't see a lot of kind of author, or when I say a lot, I don't see any where he's written down like this author. I like this idea from this author per se. So, no. But I again, influences. I'm sure he was influenced by things that he was reading at the time or had read at the time, or that were available and that he might have come across. But now I want to read about Zothique. Now I'm.
Well, I mean, the one thing that's interesting is, I mean, obviously when he wrote, about Conan, he had to immerse himself in that world before he could write it, and I'm thinking that he must have gotten some kind of influence that way. That, I mean, something must have like spilled over, and he, either consciously or subconsciously picked up on an idea that it's like, yeah, this, I'll remember this for later. when I do.
That's a good idea, because originally as well, like obviously his original idea for Eye of the World was very sci-fi as well, wasn't it? It was very sci-fi.
Yeah, the dark one did not. It was not. And I'm trying to like not ruin things from the book. So yes, yes, there's some definite more sci-fi sounding roots to the dark side, if you will, of this equation of the books. And it's this idea almost like, I think it was, if I remember correctly, like Forsaken were more kind of like this was like the dark one's more like a demon from another dimension kind of thing, and the Forsaken were kind of like the demons or the whatever. In other words, this idea of they came from another world, and I think that was a concept. I almost always love everything he finally chose. I love his so you know what I mean, like his process of seeing it come together. It almost gives me hope someday. I always have dreams to write, and I've written, I've done that whole cliche thing where you write 2 chapters of like 5 books, and a prologue, and I have the foundation of what I want to do. So, but it gives me hope that this idea of this forming, maybe that stuff that I initially see about an idea as it comes together, that I can maybe accomplish that, which is actually put out the good stuff from every idea that I have, and not, because almost exclusively I read his notes and I'm like, yep, glad you didn't do that. Really glad you didn't make that choice, but maybe I wouldn't say that, maybe if he had written some of those things, I would have liked that. But now that I have this other thing, I kind of always compare it against it. But yeah, I don't know from even that author. I mean, I'll go back and do some looking, but I almost exclusively it's talking about kind of the sources of myths and legends, if you will, versus books that might have.
I understand that. The interesting aspect here is that Clark Ashton Smith and William Hope Hodgson, who was also part of that group and also kind of worked in this shared world, kind of had this whole interdimensional idea of being able to pass into dream worlds and and stuff like that. So there's a lot there that you can see, and maybe I'm damaged from just reading way too much Lovecraft and Lovecraft-esque things that you start seeing a pattern and everything. But seeing that there is a connection, no matter how tenuous that connection might be, it'd be interesting to see.
There we go.
Someday somebody will write a thesis on it.
Yeah, that's the future episode of the Dusty Wheel, Lovecraft in the Wheel of Time, and it'll be just just sat there, just like this Lovecraft is everywhere, right?
I don't know if you've read this quote before, but people have asked him. This was in 2002. He's asked, "What other authors have most influenced your work?" I can't remember if I brought this up last time we spoke, but Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, Mark Twain, Robert Heinlein, John D. MacDonald, and Lewis L'Amour. Those are the ones he gave. So that doesn't mean
but it sounds like a very standard answer.
Yeah, it's like
Charles Dickens, sure. Mark Twain,
and that's again most influenced, and kind of his, speaking of his, maybe some of his favorites there, but that doesn't obviously mean he did say this. He mentioned Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, and Mark Twain, many times. Here's another one. Let's see. People that so here's some people that he recommends, other authors. And so they asked him, who would you recommend? He said, Ray Feist, Jana Wertz, C.S. Friedman, Robert Holdstock, Tad Williams, and Barry Hugart. And he said, the problem is there are a lot of people I like, and these are just the first names to come to mind. So,
not bad names.
Yeah.
To come to mind.
Yeah. So obviously, that is to say, very much well read, and how influenced he was in which aspects of how he wrote his fantasy. I mean, we're all influenced in some sort of fashion. So yeah, I love the seeing the patterns of his writing in other people's writing, because it fits really well with the whole overall theme of the Wheel of Time, right? Our future and past, and that we're influenced by both in his world. So and maybe in a previous turning, he was an author that was influenced by
Maybe
all
he
these
was
authors.
Lovecraft in a previous.
That's right. He's a culmination of all these authors in previous lives, and then he wrote this. It's interesting to go and kind of look and see what the authors were that, because he mentions other ones, Guy Gavroche, Turtle Dove. I don't know what that is. Terry Pratchett.
Yeah.
He mentions Robert Holdstock. He mentions obviously George R.R. Martin with later ones that he mentioned. Anyways,
it's a real good lot of different authors from. It just shows you how long that Robert Jordan was writing this for. That he's got, from you go for those first names to like George Martin and this kind of stuff. It's like, wow, that's quite a big lapse of time there.
Yeah, I guess he. This was a paraphrase answer, but he said finally he recommended several authors, but he said the guy who wrote Cryptomonicon was really good. I don't know, Neil. I looked him up, Neil Stevenson. So I haven't.
Neil Stevenson, yeah. I think he's in that kind of circle as well. But it's kind of a weird one, when you have those kind of, especially if you do like obviously with Chris's kind of, it's like a dog with a bone. I think he wants to prove this is like thing, but because he did immerse himself into like Robert E. Howard to write Conan and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like even if it wasn't his kind of thing, because sometimes you can just write for a job, which I think the Conan ones may well have been for him. It was like just to get into writing. I mean, I do ghost writing, and sometimes you just write because it's a job, and I've done screenwriting, and it's just it's a job, and but you do immerse yourself into that kind of world and influence, and you do then pick up little bits and bobs, and it's like you read about Tolkien when he was in that writers group that had C.S. Lewis in it and these other people, and Tolkien would never admit that anything from Narnia influenced Lord of the Rings and his work, but it did. There is shared things in between both their books because they were in a writers group together, and they're talking about ideas, and they're talking about, and the influence is going to creep in there at some point or the other.
Yeah, and I think, and that is, but that was like almost Jordan's point. He was like, yeah, there's so many influences, and what if I wove a story that it wasn't about one of those influences? It was a story unique to all of them coming in, and me kind of spinning them all around and spinning a tale that's our future and past. So that's what I love about it. I've always loved that aspect of it. It isn't a clone, but it does, have influences that are a part of the, his world and his metaphysics, his foundations, which, I love that about it. And, but it doesn't necessarily hit for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's like, not this again.
There's no accounting for taste, is there really? So
yeah,
that's what makes it so rich in my point, in my book. Anyway, but it'd be remiss to have you on and not talk about the upcoming TV show. I mean, we're 5 weeks away, which is crazy to think about, really. 5 weeks.
I'm not ready. I don't think. What I mean by that is, I need more time to be ready and for that moment. Like I've joked, like all of my, I know, poor me with PTO, but all of my PTO is like this year is just like I'm taking days off, and it's all to kind of do live streams and such. And so I'm already planning the end of the year of like, oh wait, if this comes out on, depending on what the release schedule is it going to be my Thursday evening? Okay, that really works well. But then Friday, maybe I'll have to take the morning off every Friday to kind of, because I'll be live streaming well into the night, and all of a sudden my Wednesday, Thursday, Friday schedule for the last 6 to 8 weeks of the year is going to be like very, very full all of Wheel of Time, all the time. And so when I say I don't know that I'm ready, I don't even understand what that's going to look like from a talking about the books, but I'm excited. It's finally here. It's actually dropping. Like that's the really cool part, right? Like we have a date, and it's not, that date is not going to be, as far as pushed. So I'm excited.
Yeah, exactly. The date is right here behind me.
Yeah, you can see
it. But yeah, it's great that there seems to be a real, and obviously that's the plan, but there seems to be a real hype building around it at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
And I spoke to my parents the other day. My mum's read The Wheel. I got my mum to read The Wheel of Time. She's a big fantasy reader, so she read it, and she was talking about it and everything. And she doesn't have Amazon Prime, and I was like, November 19th, and I could see she's like, are you going to ask me to come around to watch it? I was like, is it okay if my son stays at your house and has a sleepover? So
yeah, exactly.
you can come and watch it the next day. But it's going to be like 3 hours of TV, so like you need to make time for it.
That's what I mean. That first one's going to be ridiculous. Like people always joke, they're like, wait, you talked for 4 hours about like 2 minutes, or I guess that first trailer, we did a 12-hour live stream talking about that. What does 3 hours look like? I don't have no concept for what that looks like. It's going to be crazy.
It's funny because like, I think with the trailers, there's more to kind of delve into in a strange kind of way. And that's what and we'll talk about the clip in a moment. But I think when you get like a solid chunk of something, there's less to kind of, it's more laid out and it's more linear, and you can kind of just look at that and look at the acting and look at like the costume design and the set design and production and what have you. When it's a trailer, there's so much stuff to kind of unpack, and that's on purpose. So it's so much stuff to kind of unpack and speculate on.
Yep.
And all that. So when you get like a clip, there's nothing really to speculate on so much, because it's just there for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, these clips are actually much easier to go through for that reason, because it's much more condensed. But honestly, like clip by clip or scene by scene, it's gonna be like using that front arrow key and like, okay, you see how he's walking over to the table to talk to, oh yeah, look at how he's looking, you know what I mean? Like there's gonna be a lot of that kind of like absurd breakdown that many like me love and many don't. That's fine.
So what did you think of the clip that came out? Just over 2 minutes of a full. Although I say a full scene, but on probably the third time that I was watching it, I saw a few instances where I was like, I'm sure they've cut something here.
Yeah. Like maybe they either something they didn't want to give us, or again to give us different viewpoints or vantage points of the same kind of thing. Or they throw that in on purpose to hope that fans kind of dig in and find it, and speculate. Who knows? But this is what my conclusion after thinking about it for a day or so is, and I'm trying to think who it was on Twitter that said this. I don't want to take credit for it, but I just loved this post, and I bet you I'll find it here shortly, which is this idea that as fans often will get up in arms about what change, what changes we have from the books, and this individual pointed out just how much hadn't actually, how much we got that was like on point and condensed and adapted really, really well. And that's what I loved. Like, for example, we have this, we have them arriving, and we have this kind of communal moment where we have the community together, and then the wines spring in, and you have the men and women on different tables, which I hadn't noticed before, and you have them smoking their pipes, and you have Egwene, obviously helping to serve the room, if you will, and then you have Rand kind of obsessing a bit and kind of being angsty about this relationship, and you have Perrin kind of coming over and playing that kind of not consoling but friend part of like, how are things going, checking in on his friend. You have Matt over there, if you will, at the other side of the room, and being Matt in that regard. And you have this moment of Nynaeve trying to protect the whole space, feeling like she has to, almost so assertive that it feels, and people talk about this, that's too much, and you're like, well, yeah, have you read the books? You didn't think that Nynaeve was too much sometimes in the way that she approached situations? And you have Lan coming in, this whole announcing Moraine part of it, but really he's checking the room. He wants to be the first one in, and so he's he's kind of doing that job as a warder to make sure the room is safe. And then he's announcing her to make sure, like, we all know who this is. They're getting there quick, right? They're having this whole moment together. There's none of this, like, we got days to kind of have everyone realize that this person is here and that she's Aes Sedai, and that, you know, we're getting that kind of like communal moment really fast. You have to do that in an adaptation standpoint. You can't sit in Emond's Field for a long time and then just kind of eventually get to places. So I liked going back and thinking about it. And it was like, yeah, we got a lot of material, a lot of Egwene even seems more curious than worried, you know. They did that really well. So you know, Moraine being dismissive of Nynaeve, building kind of that. So I loved all of those little moments that are from the books, and they were consolidated into this one moment where she walks into the inn, you know, and it is dramatic, but Moraine's entry into this village and what she says and the story she tells to them are very dramatic at times.
She's a dramatic woman at the best of times.
That's a good way to put it.
And so Aes Sedai are, and I liked how they're trying to make the Aes Sedai even more important to the tapestry of Wheel of Time, whereas in the books, there's like kind of that secret. She's a lady, you know, she's a lady, and her man are here and what have you. But I liked how straight away, like, you know, the ring is here and the eyes fall on it, and straight away she's like, her just the ripple that goes through the room. It reminded me a little bit of you know, when a stranger comes to a bar in a Western. The place goes quiet, and I think, and that's a good thing. That's what, because that is what it is. They're going out to the frontier, you know, but they also want to put the marker down as well and say, listen, we're here and we mean business. And that's what she does. She does mean business. So I liked it too. I liked the music a lot, and the clip that came out as well, just a few hours earlier than that. I just, you know, just looking at it, I kind of looked at it, and then you see that sometimes, especially when the trailer came out, you had a few dissenting voices where like, oh, it's reminding me a little bit too much of Shannara. And I just went back and just looked at a clip from Shannara, and it's just night and day difference. Like the production value just leaks off the screen, even in this small little clip. You know, I think with fantasy, a lot of the times it takes a few episodes to find its feet and to find the correct tone. And I think the big pauses and delays that the production has suffered because of what has been going on in the world is only going to help it in a way, because I think when they had that kind of reset between episode 6 and 7, when they came back to film 6 and 7 and 8, they could kind of really kind of look at what they've created already, and have we struck the right tone? Have we got everything working? And I know they went back and did reshoots then, and that really fills me with confidence, because a lot of shows wouldn't have had that luxury to have that almost a year break where they were looking at things and going, okay, what can we do better? What's working? What isn't working? And we don't know how much of this has changed. I mean, that could have been a completely different scene at one time or another.
No, that's true.
So
I just love that you get a great, we don't know what happens before this, right? Like, we don't know where this falls and how much we either have or haven't experienced. We know that this is a gathering space for the community, and so that's immediately apparent when the previous teaser trailer, you know, you can tell that if there's a festive mode. Obviously, Egwene, they talk about a ceremony, and, you know, Perrin asks Rand if they've talked, and we see some of what that looks like that in the teaser trailer, like, and you get this feeling like the community is coming together. You're getting a feel for the community in that room, so you're starting to care about them. Well, we know there's going to be an attack. Like, we know there's going to be an attack, so they're trying to really establish this as people. With an attack happening so quickly, the thing you risk is you don't care, right? You don't care about the people, you don't care about the community. And I think it's smart that they've kind of woven in some, like, who is this community, and this community cares for each other, and they're individuals that you're seeing in this inn together. And so you're getting a feel for just how significant this is and how much, they depend upon each other, right? That room, sure, there might have been men over this table, women over this table, but it was a very friendly place to be for those individuals. So I just loved when I thought back about it, right? It's that whole kind of process afterwards going like, oh, this is smart because I'm going to care, right? I'm going to care about what's going to happen here in ways that you can lose in a show where you just kind of enter a village. They don't give you much. They just focus on a couple of core people. And then some village gets attacked and you're just like, you hear screams and you're like, oh, I don't know. Let's just follow my main characters. So
it's a smart way of doing it, because even when you think about it in the books, you're more concerned about the characters that aren't from the two, apart from the main like Emmonsfield 5. You're more concerned about the people that are coming into the Two Rivers, like Padden Fane, Tom Merrilin, Moraine. There's a lot of people landing in the in Emmonsfield that day, and you're more concerned as a reader, like who are all these people and why, So it's a smart move, I think, to kind of. We know that Padden Fane is going to be there as he is in the books, or at least we think we do. But we know that Tom probably isn't, and I think it's a smart move to kind of move all that away and give us some time to kind of get a feel for this region. And when it's a wrench for them to go away from home for the first time, like, we have to feel that as an audience. If we don't, then it doesn't matter.
I think we all kind of. This was a lot of the commentary at the beginning when we started talking about the adaptation side of this was, are they going to go too quick, right? Are we really going to are we going to feel like this is this village of people that we care that has been attacked? Or are we just going to kind of like quickly get to the end of the book? Cause I want to get to the, important parts. And how do you do that? You have to do it fast. And the teaser trailer in this scene here that we got makes me go like, oh, they're embedding. We've seen some photos of Moraine during the day in Emmonsfield. So she's going to be there during the day. Seems like before an attack happens. So we're getting some type of ceremony. We're getting that day. Then it seems like we're getting a night. And then we see Rand and Egwene together in a more intimate scene in the teaser trailer. Where does that hit? I have to go back, and I can't remember the teaser trailer. You hear them speaking, but now it's like, does that hit after? Is that after that night of the arrival? Is that before the night of the arrival? Like, it seems like we're embedding a bit into Emmonsfield in a way that I guess I didn't anticipate. And people were worried about the, not getting a feel for the world. So I guess at this point, I'm appreciative of their focus on these people, and the whole not having a book scene per beat, like that was never going to happen anyway. I don't know. I get it. People say this all the time. They're like, don't dismiss people that want to point out changes from the books. And the point isn't to dismiss anyone about the fact that there's going to be changes or that you can't talk about them. We're going to be talking about the changes. Yes. But it should be the lack of surprise at this moment. If you've been talking about this for 2 years, no one believed that there weren't going to be changes. So it shouldn't be like, oh my gosh, changes. It should be like, oh yeah, there were going to be changes. These are interesting changes to make, or I hate the changes they made. Whatever, have your opinion about it. But it's like, I can't, I still see people like, I can't watch this. There's changes. I'm like, I don't understand. Like, there was going to be changes. There are going to be consolidations. They're going to, you knew that at this point. The people that didn't even know there was a show coming, you have your time to kind of
there's a few weeks,
take a couple weeks and get used to it. But the rest of us, you knew changes were coming. The shocking aspect of it always kind of hits me a little bit off at this point. For those of us that have been just following it, really, it's more interesting to me to kind of talk about the changes as far as like, oh, okay, why would they make these changes?
Why would they make the changes? Which is something that I'm interested to get into when it happens. Obviously, being a writer and having done screenwriting and stuff like that, I'm always interested to see. When I see the change, I'll be like, oh, okay. And Lord of the Rings is a great one to study for that, because a lot of people, because it's been out for so long now, that's the definitive version for a lot of people. Like, above the books for many people. So many people have read the books, but so many people haven't, and have just seen the movies. And then even you get casual reads of the book saying, oh yeah, it was a great adaptation. It was a great adaptation of the spirit, but as no actual beat for beat adaptation, it wasn't. You know,
I'm the casual. I'm the casual fan going, oh yeah, that was great.
yeah. I mean, look, I love them, you know, but you look at the two towers in particular, and it is vastly different to the material that it comes from. Aragorn has a completely different arc throughout the whole films, pretty much, and also in that particular film. But it captured the spirit, and when you look at it and say, well, why were the changes made? And you can see it and you go, okay, yeah, I understand why they were made from the books, because for various different reasons. So that's what I'm really looking for. I mean, obviously I'm looking forward to the show as well, because I get to see the Wheel of Time on TR, you know. But I'm looking forward to kind of looking at it and just kind of learning from it, and kind of and like, you know, looking at these kind of little reasons. And yeah, I might not agree with everything that happens, but I'm looking forward to seeing why I don't agree with what happens and why I do. Speaking of other things as well, speaking of people you mentioned before, so going into season 2, we got some new cast members announced as well, and I think possibly you are very happy about.
Well, it's not just me. It was like 63% of the audience at the live stream that we did. I think there was like, I don't know, there's over 1,000 people watching, and they were a lot of people voted in that poll. I think one of the first time we asked, and 63 or some odd percent believed that Natasha O'Keeffe was playing Lanfear, but a lot of people believe that it's Elida. So that tends to be, and I don't know why. And again, this is one of those like book things. Elida, in my head, Elida was going to be someone that had an appearance of being even older is the wrong word, but more. Yeah, maybe it's older. I don't know. I don't know what the word is. Like when I saw Natasha, I was like, oh, okay. I wonder if they're this. I think she would make a great Lanfear, but she could be anybody at this point, right? Elida, sure. They could be going. Maybe this is Elida.
I mean, I went straight with, like, I knew her anyway from Peaky Blinders. It's funny. It's one of the first times. There's a few people that have been announced where I was like, oh yeah, I know who they are straight away. But this one's like the first one where I was like, I know both of those people really well because of like Drop Rich TV so much, and straight away in my head I had Lanfear and Verin straight away.
Sure, that's And, what's funny about that is Verin, Mira Sial, people, 90% of the people voting for that one were like, definitely Verin. Like the fans are much more certain that we've gotten Verin, although there's other options for her too, like many other options. So fans don't necessarily want to lean into those options, but Sheriam came up and others. This is the clue that Rafe gave. He said, these are two of the most important, or three of the most important. Maybe it was talking about all three of the most important, but basically talking about his important characters. Now, Elida's an important character. Sheriam's an important character. Lanfear, maybe one of them is Mogedion. In other words, there's lots of important characters in the Wheel of Time. But yes, back to your original point, I would love that if Natasha's Lanfear, that's awesome.
I went straight to it because at the same point as you, I always kind of thought Elida was a little bit on the middle-age spectrum of Aes Sedai, if you get what I mean. I always thought she appeared a little older than Moraine and so on.
Yeah, I thought she was a little. I can't remember now. I know they were there around the same time as far as they were learning. I can't remember exactly. I mean, she's certainly not old in the aging of Aes Sedai in that way. And so again, and then you talk agelessness or whatever. In other words, anybody, basically they can make anybody. That's like, there's no you have to follow some recipe that you don't have to follow descriptions exactly. And not that Natasha could not be Elida, she absolutely could. I saw a picture that somebody posted of Natasha, and I was like, okay, yeah, I totally see Elida. I can see it here. I want Natasha to be Lanfear. I want. Well, no, it's just, but it was just it was a more kind of severe. Maybe they had pulled her hair up a little bit, and just the look she had on her face,
the high-necked red dress.
Yeah, I think that was the picture I saw where I was like, not that Elida. Anyways, it was more just like her face, and I was like, oh yeah, I can totally see it. So any of these actors can be anybody. But yes, I'm excited about the idea that Lanfear has to be in the book, has to be in the show, right? And so anyone basically is like that. I think that could be Lanfear. That might be Lanfear. So, who's are you? So you're at Lanfear, Varen too. There are a lot of fans are.
Yeah, straight away, and I think as well. Like, I mean, obviously, actors act. That's what they do. So they can do a variety of roles. But from like Natasha with Peaky Blinders, and then Mira with like the first time I kind of came across her was she was in this comedy sketch show called Goodness Gracious Me, which was a British Asian sketch show, and it's hilarious, it's brilliant, and it was like it was kind of, I don't know if you ever came across the Fast Show or anything like that. It was contemporary with that, and it's really, really good. It's still, you go back and look at clips on YouTube and stuff, and it's still very, very funny. And she is one of these actors that has like the comedic. She reminds me a little bit of, Miriam Gargoyles, who was Professor Sprout in Harry Potter, and she can do that very, very well.
Gotcha.
Grandmotherly, absent-mindedness, and then switch straight away to very sharp and very dry. And that's Varen. And I think to play Varen, you have to have that comedic side as well, because there's a lot of, not to say that she's like a hilarious character or anything, but there is that potential to mine comedy with her interactions with other people.
Yes, how her interactions are very funny without her. It's almost like a deadpan humor. That's how I interpret that humor, where she's laughing, or she's kind of winking a lot, and you want to laugh at how she approaches, but other people are kind of unsure of how to take it. Exactly. So I know I can see it both, right? We're just excited fans, and we're like, yes, we know Varen and Lanfear have to come into the show, so why not these two people? They look like they could fit those characters really well. So I'm and getting Elaine there, right? This was that. Are we going to get these major characters? Rafe's, I think, said this before, which is like, he's not cutting as much as people think he's cutting, and basically said like, how do you think I could do the Wheel of Time without these major characters? Like, how do you even? So the fact that, if this is Elaine, Lanfear, and Varen, like coming in a season 2, honestly, we don't get a lot of Elaine in the first book, but we do start to develop that character. And so this idea that, we're going to focus on these new characters is very Wheel of Time-esque, right? Bringing in more point of views, building out the complexity of this. So the fact that they're not dropping off or slowing down, and they're just giving us more and more kind of complex characters as part of the story, and how are they going to build that out? And I can't wait to kind of see what they're going to develop. And that's season 2, and they're already excited about it. And then you mentioned like a season 3 death, and he's getting fans excited. Like, man, when they say the words they've greenlit season 3, I mean, that's I hope I'm a hopeful fan at this point of like that they're hopeful because they think that they have something really special here, and that they're really embedding into the idea of getting to a season 3.
Well, I think the shooting season 2 now, and they had all the scripts done for season 2 when they were filming season 1. So you'd imagine if they're in talking to costume designers about characters' deaths in season 3, I'd say it's pretty much a surefire thing.
Show faith, well, I mean, you have to be there, you have to be talking about it, but you have to be positive and forward thinking in those regards. But I'm as fans, I'm there. I get it. In the end of the day, some book fans won't like this, some non-book fans won't like it, but what I hope is that it's really good, and I hope it gets better. You know what I mean? I hope they find their feet. They find their feet in season 1, and season 2 is just, and that happens in so many shows, right? Like if season 1's good, I have twice as much hope for season 2 being like amazing. So I'm a huge fan of these books for 30 years, and I've been talking about it online for so long. At this point, everything I say probably is it's hype in my head. It's like, just be good is what we as fans we're all hoping for.
Exactly. Well, Matt, thanks again for coming on, and it's always a pleasure when you're coming on to our show. And yeah, let's just fingers crossed for 5 weeks time. There'll obviously be another trailer before then, so there'll be he'll be very busy in the next 5 weeks. But thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I do want to shout out, I can't pronounce the person's name on Twitter of time, but it's Aratulia Sedai. It's the Aes Sedai of the White Aja. It's Aratouial Sedai. Wrote like of the scene like 28 things that were, book accurate about that one about that 1-2-minute clip from the Wine Spring Inn. And that's why I love the work the fans are doing to kind of be excited and notice the hard work that's obviously going into this to give us the show. So yeah, expect those lists to be hundreds long and all sorts of fans posting them of like basically what we're seeing from the books and the TV show. But yes, I just wanted to shout out that list is a lot of fun, and you should go check it out on Twitter. If you,
I'll include I'll include it in the
oh yeah,
so it's there. Yeah,
awesome.
Thanks very much. Well, and again, we'll see you soon, and we can delve into the Shadow Rising and the first season of Wheel of Time. Probably by the time we read the Shadow Rising.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I can't wait. Yeah, good luck on the Shadow Rising. I'm really interested to see what Chris is how he's gonna feel about that. And yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I'm glad I could knock this out with you and talk about that final, the first 3 books as a whole complete idea, not a trilogy, but yeah, I'm gonna walk away with that whole concept that we talked about, which is purposely this is where the disconnect happened. For fandom, and Jordan's pushing this disconnect between the reader and Rand a bit more in that Dragon Reborn, and I think it works really well for what comes in the next many books.
Next few books. So thanks very much, and everyone who's watching at home, until the next turning of the wheel. Goodbye.
That's right.